Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. This weekend we have a very special guest, Shri Babaji Bob Kindler ji, and he is going to speak on a very important topic, Chaturdasya Yoga, the combination of four great yogas, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Karma Yoga. Thank you for coming on our platform, Babaji. It is our honor to have you with among us. Viewers, a very short introduction to Babaji. Babaji is a spiritual director of Sharada Ramakrishna Vivekananda Associations. He is based in US and he was initiated into Ramakrishna lineage by Revered Swami Asheshanandaji, a direct disciple of Sri Sharada Devi, the wife and spiritual concept of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So with this very short introduction, I would not take much more time. I would request Babaji to start today's session and share his insights, his advice about how to practice yoga and what are these four different yogas and how to combine them together into an integrated practice. You can start, Babaji.
Thank you very much, Nitinji. So I'd like to start with a chant from the Bhagavad Gita in accordance with our subject today. Om Yatadipo Nivatasto Ningate Sopama Smrita Yogino Yatachitasya Yunjato Yoga Matmanaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Like a candle in a windless place, its flame steady and unflickering, so too is the mind of the yogi, still and unwavering, meditating deep upon the Atman in yoga, steep in yoga within. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Here in Hawaii, it is about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I know that on the West Coast and East Coast, where some of my students are watching, it's in the late evening and later evening, and I think in India it's probably very early in the morning right now. So I hope people watching around the world will be able to take in these teachings on Chaturdasya Yoga. That is the four yogas or four main yogas which are universally accepted as yoga. I think it's very important to bring those forward as often as we can in a time, in a day, and in a world such as this, so that many other things which are part of yoga practice at different levels of consciousness do not necessarily obscure or take over these four main important yogas. And you know, the subject of this talk today has a subtitle of Swami Vivekananda's New Religion of the Age, for he was often mentioning Dhyanam, Bhakti, Karma, and Raja Yoga, or what Krishna would say in the Gita, Buddhi Yoga, when he gave his own talks here in the US and in England in the late 1800s, when he was here on the scene in the West. And he called them, these four, the new religion of the age. There are quotes from his writings, actually his talks, that say the same. And so we knew he was very keen on having all four sides of the human being and its character matured, because he said he had met many people in both East and West who were good at one particular yoga, but the other three were rather immature yet or not developed. So we know he also put that together with the four types of characters or personalities that are here in the world. That is the studious person, which would fit Jnana Yoga very well, and the devotional person who goes towards a bhakti path, the contemplative person who goes towards Patanjala, or what we call Raja Yoga or Buddha Yoga, that is the yoga of meditation. And of course then a greater percentage of people in the Karma Yoga path, which is the path of action. The active person goes there. So the synthesis of these three yogas, or these four yogas, is a very good dharmic teaching to contemplate on, and how to make the connections in a hands-on way. I like to try and share the teachings of the Dharma that we're now here doing in a way that will help people's spiritual life in a rather hands-on way. And rather than hopefully it not just being a lecture or a talk or some sharing of facts and information, but going a little deeper. We know the three great tools of spiritual life in India are to hear, Shruti, to contemplate, Yukti or Manana, and then to realize Nididhyasana, or in another way of saying Anubhava, get some direct spiritual experience. And then there's a fourth way that isn't brought up too much called Sakshatkara. And that means to bring it fully, a full circle into life. So there are actually four great proofs of truth, or ways of, and you might call them phases, of participating in an active spiritual life in a hands-on way. And that's what I would like to talk about for these 2 hours. I would like to hold some space open at the end for questions, which I would entertain very gladly. So you may write those down or note them as we go through these teachings. My style of teaching too, as you know, many of you who are joining here today, is by using what I call charts or some visuals. I think not only the visual, the audible part of things going on, but to have something to look upon as you listen helps that Shruti part of the whole process. That is to hear, because we know we want to hear the revealed scriptures, mainly, as Lord Vashishta has often said in his great work, Yoga Vashishta. There's a difference between the revealed scriptures and those who are just ordinary scriptures. And the revealed scriptures are always talking about the individual's personal relationship with the absolute, God with form. And then, of course, meditation would take you into God without form. So in our particular tradition, which is in my case the Ramakrishna order I was initiated into, when I got my mantra diksha and proceeded into spiritual path when I was in my 20s, very fortunate, I thought, to be able to do that. I was given instructions to use the mantra and to concentrate on the form of my Ishtam, as many people are. But then my guru, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, is one of the images you see behind me on the little fireplace shrine here I'm sitting in front of. He told me basically that after I had calmed the mind and readied it for meditation with the mantra, doing some japa, maybe hundreds and hundreds of times, and then it would be good then to put the beads aside and with that calm mind begin to contemplate Brahman, or God without form. So we know Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa often mentioned that. He said that God exists with form and God exists beyond form. However, he also added a very interesting addition to that statement by saying that God exists beyond both form and formlessness. So he was always keen on bringing to us that idea of Advaita Vedanta. And so I'm very happy to be speaking here on Advaita Academy, as I speak so often on our own SRV Association's live streaming website and so forth. So it's very good to be here with all of you who are watching through that venue. Now, the two titles, Chaturdarsha Yoga and the New Religion of this Age, I've described that as two bookends by two great and very powerful beings, Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm referring to chapter 13 when I speak of Chaturdarsha Yoga and the four yogas in the Bhagavad Gita. And also chapter 2, verse 39. He brings it up early on when he mentions these four yogas. I can actually, I've marked that here so I can read it to you. It'll just take a few seconds. By meditation, some behold the self in the self, by the self, others by the yoga of knowledge, and yet others by karma yoga. Still others, not knowing these, worship as they have heard from others in the bhakti fashion. They too go beyond death by their devotion to what they have heard. So we have that very powerful mention. And if those of you who want to note that and mark it in your copies, that is, of course, chapter 13, slokas 24 and 25. You can also look back on chapter 2, sloka 39, and see his early mention of it. So he gives some room in the Gita, and of course, at the end, with a few of these visuals I'm going to show you, you can see that at the end of the Gita, he also brings up the four yogas and says basically that those who share these four yogas with others share the supreme secret of spiritual life with them. So I think it's very apropos in this day and age, as I was just saying, that with all the many forms yoga is taking, physical and healing and psychotherapy and arts, and so many people coming forth with their own take and their own experience in participating in yoga as an overall term, a universal term, that we also should pay some great heed to these two great bookends. Sri Krishna being that one early on, and then in the present time, Swami Vivekananda, because he was the one that told us that the four religions and bringing it back into contemporary times, that's the new religion of this age. I think it's a very telling statement of his, and it allows for people who possibly could be spread too thin in their spiritual pursuits, or maybe some people are having a difficult time getting into formless meditation. Maybe they're not cracking the books, as we used to say in our when we were young, going to college. You get in there and open the books and study them. That's the Jnana Yoga part of everything. Or possibly they're feeling dry, as most people admit to being in the bhakti department. They're not able to call up that deep love for the Lord, which is really the essence of everything. Sri Ramakrishna once told us in the Gospel of Ramakrishna there that the machine runs on, and then the mechanic comes every day and puts oil in it. So if he doesn't come, he doesn't show up 1 or 2 days, and the oil runs out, then the whole machine seizes up and breaks down. So he's, of course, talking about the body-mind mechanism, we call it in Vedanta, or sometimes it's called the psychophysical being, and how it runs on this oil, and this oil in his case is bhakti, devotion to the Lord. So we want to make sure that we have ample supply of that, and we are that mechanic that's going to check the machine of the body-mind mechanism and make sure that all the fluids are kept full and the whole machine is in good running order. That's the fourfold mind we're talking about, basically. And buddhi is one of those aspects. That's your intellect. And I think it goes much deeper into intelligence itself. which is close to consciousness, according to Swami Vivekananda. He said that intelligence is the first thing that, out of consciousness. So in that way, we want to make sure that our intelligence is honed. That's one part of the fourfold mind. The other part is our thoughts and our memory. It's called chitta. And that, of course, is a product coming out of the dual mind called manas. And all of that then is sort of the chariot upon which the ahamkara, or the individual self, the ego, it's not the indivisible self, which is the Atman, but the individual self, the ego, perches on that chariot, and as Shankara says in the Vivakuchudamani, moves place to place. Place to place there means not just from town to town in a car, or from city to city in a plane, or from house to house in a neighborhood, but actually from waking into dreaming, and from dreaming into deep sleep, and deep sleep into Turiya, and then coming back full cycle into the waking state. That's the ego riding the antakarana, the fourfold mind, from place to place. It's much like Jesus talking about the kingdom of heaven within. And so you need a vehicle to move to the kingdom of heaven, and that's your fourfold mind. And it would be good for us to focus on that so that body orientation doesn't take over the whole picture, as it has here in the West in terms of Hatha Yoga. It's good that there is some sort of way of exercising the body, but we have to make sure, since the body is reborn from the mind gives rise to all bodies, that we keep the mind in perfect shape. And we see that example in the great souls that come here, like Sri Krishna and Swami Vivekananda. They've taken bodies which are perfect, and their minds are perfect. Their thoughts are lofty and of a non-dual nature. Their meditations are of a non-dual nature. And then they come and they help other people with that perfect mind. So the mind is the producer of all the worlds, all the lokas, and all the forms that inhabit them. If you hear teachings like that coming from Swami Vivekananda's lectures, which have all been noted down into complete works, and if you hear that in the Gita as you read through the 18 chapters, which is mention of many different yogas, then you will consider that to be of paramount importance to keep the mind focused. Again, as Shankar said, like wiping a mirror of dust each day, so that it can have the most perfect view of the Atman, the divine being that is centered inside of every being or every person and is in everything. That's the indivisible self, Atman. So with that as a kind of introduction to the two bookends, we can call them these two great cosmic personalities or archetypical souls. Because remember about Swami Vivekananda, although he's newer and more current and on the scenes recently, that Sri Ramakrishna nevertheless called him a Nitya Siddha, a perfect soul, perfect man. And so therefore his parents named him rightly when they called him Narendranath, the Lord of Men. So here's a true singular world teacher on the scene recently. And so we pay our deep obeisances to him and draw from his words and his teachings as the more current, updated version of Sanatana Dharma, bringing it into a whole new era, a whole new fold. And it's good that it is being done that way, and we have to entertain it such, so that the four yogas can get, each of them can get our focus, our concentration, and that all four sides of our being, the studious part of our being, the contemplative part of our being, the active side of our being, and the intelligent part of our being, the all four yogas and all four temperaments, that is the devotional part of our being, all get full measure of attention from us, and we can be well-rounded like that. Let's try and experiment here. I want to pull up a visual for you so that you can see a little bit more deeply of what I'm speaking. We're going to try and put up the four yogas chart that I composed for these kinds of classes. And I hope everyone watching can see this in a good way. The four yogas and their synthesis. I put this together some years ago and wanted to call it back here for this class that I'm most fortunate to share with you on Advaita Academy. And there in the top, you see in the middle, two very recent pictures that were discovered not too long ago, after the rest were discovered, of Swami Vivekananda. So I put those there, and of course, the word, the Om sign underneath it with the four arrows, and all of these indicating these four yogas. Swami Vivekananda has a quote right there at the top. He says, "The teaching of the new incarnation, Sri Ramakrishna, is that the best points of yoga, devotion, knowledge, and work must be combined so as to form a new society." So you can see there when he says yoga, he means Raja or Buddhi Yoga. It would be called Buddhi Yoga in the Gita. And Raja Yoga, of course, means Patanjali, the eight-limbed yoga of Lord Patanjali. When he says devotion, he of course means Bhakti Yoga. When he says knowledge, he means the Jnana Yoga. And and then finally work, of course, would be Karma Yoga. So you have the meditation yoga first, yoga itself, getting into meditation and samadhi, then Bhakti Yoga, devotion, then Jnana Yoga, knowledge, and then Karma Yoga, work. They have to be integrated. And so that you don't just become one-sided. Of course, we want to introduce any four of these yogas to the world at large. It was also a deep desire of Swami Vivekananda that people would go house to house if necessary, door to door, and share with them any one of these yogas according to their temperament. Of course, the person who is moving about sharing these things is going to have to know something about each one and have developed it also inside of themselves via sadhana. That's one of the things that's hopefully not going missing in today's society. We need, talking about a new society, we're going to have to be sadhaks or sadhakas and do our practice every day. Even the illumined souls say that they prefer to keep their practices up in order to keep the mirror of the mind wiped clean, because the mind, just putting it bluntly, is not the indivisible self, the Atman. It's a tattva of the 24 tattvas. It's one. So of course that would be a part of your Samkhya Yoga, and that's what Sri Krishna just mentioned here in that verse of the Gita I talked to you about, Sakyena Yoga. So he wants to bring that yoga of tattvas into vogue again. That is Swami Vivekananda. So back to the chart then, let's see what these four yogas then consist of. And you can see there, Bhakti Yoga, if you wanted a definition for it, union with reality via one-pointed devotion. Raja Yoga is under it, in that picture of Ram on the left, if you're all seeing that. Sri Ram is union with reality via focused meditation on divine reality. And then on the far right-hand side of the chart, you'll see the other two yogas listed there, Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. So let's see what they have to say, if we can see the top of the chart. And here it comes, and there it is. So we have Jnana Yoga, union with reality via knowledge of the Atman. And Karma Yoga, union with reality via selfless action, offered as service to God and mankind. That's actually some words from Swami Vivekananda that I borrowed. He had some very nice ways of saying work as worship, labor as love. So he would give a new turn to Karma Yoga, which he was of the opinion that Karma Yoga was actually one of the more important yogas, if not the most important yoga today, because of all the prevalent suffering that people are undergoing. And suffering here means not just poverty and illness and so forth, but suffering of restless mind, which is very, very difficult to get rid of, or we call it the guna rajas. So slothful mind, restless mind, tamas and rajas, very difficult to deal with and causes a kind of suffering that's in a way more problematic than physical suffering for people, which can be gotten over by raising the mind off of the body. But this restless, if the mind is restless and also if it's slothful, then how are you going to raise the mind off of your physical suffering? So again, very important to focus in on the antakarna and do some housekeeping. Right? Ramakrishna used to say that. It was the top of the head. You see, it's sort of like the attic of the whole body-mind mechanism, and it doesn't get cleaned very often. So, you know, if you do some spring cleaning, you get up in the top of your house, at least here in the West, and you open up all the shutters and windows, and you dust and you sweep all the dust from ages out. It's a very apropos metaphor for people cleaning their antakarna, or their mind. And hopefully it's going to happen more than just once a year or once a season. That maybe needs to be focused on every day of your life, the polishing of the mirror of the intellect. So with those four definitions of yoga, let's go back to the chart, and so that we can have this visual. And we can see that the common word of all four of those was union. So that's one word in English we can have for yoga. It's union, or you could say oneness, but I like the Zen Buddhist teaching of not two-ness. Not two-ness is a good way of saying, because you don't want to take the non-dual reality, Brahman or Chaitanya, or the highest non-dual awareness or consciousness, which is timeless and deathless, and put a limitation on it. And when you say it's one, then people often think of the number one. It's not a numerical one that we're referring to. It's an all-pervasive oneness that we have to talk about. So while we have this chart up, and since it's so directly applicable to this subject that we're entertaining in this class, let's look at some of the bullet points that I was able to pull out of the teachings of the various ancient rishis of India. There you see at the top Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. I put them across from each other, and Ganesha in the middle there. I hope you're seeing that. And I put Bhakti and Dhyanam across from each other because my teacher used to teach, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him. He used to say almost in every lecture that these were the two wings of the bird, that a bird couldn't get off the ground with one wing. And of course, he was speaking here in the northwest of US to a group of maybe 30, 40 people who had come to his Sunday talk. And he would always bring up the two wings of the bird because he wanted people to develop at least two of those yogas, one being bhakti, devotion, increase your devotion to God, and one being jnana, because jnana gets rid of your ignorance. Sri Krishna says in the Gita, for instance, nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate. Nahi jnanena pavitram iha vidyate. Pavitram, you see. So these essential Sanskrit words that you use are filled with the ancient spirit of spirituality that was realized in India. So that means knowledge is the greatest of all purifiers, pavitram. It's the greatest of all purifiers. So you'll realize this after using it, he says. So a point could be made here for some other forms of one-sidedness that happen in terms of Sri Krishna's teachings. There are some people who focus on the Gita as if bhakti were the only path in it, and that was the only thing you needed. But you can see here, Sri Krishna's teachings are very widespread throughout the Gita. There are at least 18 yogas there, which is the names of the 18 chapters, and many other very powerful yogas too. I have a chart I'll show you on that soon. And if, you can see how many of the, other than just the main 4 yogas, how many multiple yogas there are that are very powerful tools for perfecting or sweeping out your attic, cleaning the body-mind mechanism of its various encrustations of ignorance. So Jnana Yoga will get rid of your ignorance. And I would go so far as to say that if you could, and I'm sort of paraphrasing Swami Vivekananda here, if you could use Jnana Yoga first, get in knowledge of the scriptures and use your viveka, your discriminating buddhi, intellect, and you got a good hold of that yoga first, then you could love more. You see, bhakti would become pure, because we're in this day and age having trouble loving in the dharmic way, loving the Lord, even loving our wives and families, or loving each other as human beings. When will man be friend to man? Vivekananda used to say when he was in the body. Oh Lord, when will man be friend to man? So if you had this discriminating wisdom honed in you, your love would be true, purer and truer. Let's say, and I'm already beginning to synthesize these as an example for you. Let's say you use Jnana Yoga in terms of your service, Karma Yoga. Then you would be much more mistake-free, and you'd be able to serve God and mankind. The point there being, if you serve mankind, Swami Vivekananda once said, and I'm paraphrasing him again, then the man that you're serving, man, woman, you're serving, it may get to their ego. They may feel their inflation of ego going on, or some arrogance coming on. Oh, he's worshiping me. But if you worship God in mankind rather than worship mankind, then the person will all of a sudden feel like you're speaking to something inside of him or her. And that then you're getting deeper into the person with your service. So serve God and mankind, don't serve mankind, was one of the beautiful sayings that Vivekananda insights he was able to give us. So then that's how your work is going to become worship, or your labor is going to become love. It's a very wonderful thing to put jnana and karma together then. And there have been teachers and teachings in the past, not so clear, not so pure, that have put the two against each other, as if action and inaction can't somehow go together or shouldn't be put together. There's no way you're going to be able to avoid putting them together. Same with action and meditation. And that's the next yoga that I can put Jnana Yoga together with. If your Jnana Yoga cleared the ignorance out of your mind and you started to meditate, you'd have much deeper meditations, much more profound meditations. You'd remember your dreams, which is a very important part, your higher dreams, because that gets you into deep sleep and brings you out of deep sleep. It's like a visionary level of your consciousness where you have dreams that you've forgotten. You could even then remember the dreams you're having of your ancestors, if ancestor worship was a part of your yoga, a part of your spiritual path. So in so many ways, Jnana Yoga, that sword of wisdom, we call it sword of mother wisdom, will cut away so many problems out of the way of realizing these other 3 yogas. So that's the 2 wings of the bird I'm commenting on right now. Let's go back to the chart and look at those bullet points, because with this as a sort of precursor and sharing it to you, the bullet points will make more sense. Well, first of all, on the Bhakti Yoga side of things, the yoga of devotion to God, you can see Sri Krishna's quote there. Serene-minded, beyond both grief and desire, same-sided and kind to all, such a one attains supreme devotion to me. So serene-minded, you probably again think of Jnana Yoga, how Buddhi Yoga, Sri Krishna says, is the yoga of evenness of mind. So you see how he's already, even in his words, putting together these yogas in just a sentence. Beyond both grief and desire, same-sided, kind to all. So there's your action, your karma yoga, your parikramas, and so forth. So basically, that's Sri Krishna's words right out of the Gita about bhakti, which includes 2 yogas in it. It's right there. You can see then the bullet points real quick. Let's go through them. The person who's following Bhakti Yoga listens to accounts of God's deeds. That's, of course, also, I think, the second limb of Bhakti in the Ramayana, when Sri Ramchandra comes up with the 9 limbs of Bhakti. Listen to the accounts of God's deeds. So you get together with Guru, Sangha, and hopefully family, because in the West here, like I said, there's not a lot of sadhana going on, or daily devotions or readings in the households. More of a materialistic country, and we're trying to bring yoga and Vedanta into the country, and it's failing and falling into the physical zone only, where people do a little exercise. But this is a much more important yoga for balance in life and for sharing and for gaining enlightenment. These other yogas are key for that. As Shankara said in his Vivekananda, you cannot get enlightenment through hundreds and thousands of acts. You cannot get enlightenment through hundreds and thousands of asanas. You cannot get enlightenment through family and progeny. So there must be something else that we're missing then if we're thinking we're trying to get the light of Brahman or the light of yoga into our life and failing to do so with these inferior means. So here's where you would become a yogi or a yogini. Say this is very important for people to understand, especially in the West. So listen to accounts of God's deeds every day. Then engage sincerely in devotional rituals. The greatest austerity, Sri Krishna says, he doesn't mention fasting or jogging or asana. What he mentions is bowing down before the altar, offering incense to the deity, and lighting candles, and sitting to meditate and do japa before. He says that's the best of all austerities on the level of physical austerities. You also purify heart and mind via daily worship. This is all bhakti path. You get initiation into the spiritual path by a teacher. Of course, mantra diksha, I think, is common to all 4 yogas. In fact, mantra yoga could be classes of 5th yoga. It's been said before. It's so important. So get initiation into the spiritual path by an illumined soul, by an acharya. And then perform japa of the holy names. We made names plural there because there are going to be different ideals for different people. You cannot insist upon your ideal being the only ideal. That's not universal. It's not indicative or representative of the Sanatana Dharma. We have one thing in the world that's truly universal, and that's this path of India with all its many philosophies and how they've been able to get along so well with each other, not only physically with nonviolence for the main part, but also philosophically agree with one another. Great souls like Patanjali, the father of yoga, and Krishna, and Vedavyasa, the father of Vedanta, and Lord Kapila of Samkhya. They've all just played off of each other and put together this beautiful integrated Sanatana Dharma, this great universal philosophy. So we need to be able to uphold that and make sure that it's kept properly represented. So when I say perform japa of the holy names, then one person's mantras are going to be different to suit their temperaments. And that's not a matter of superiority or inferiority. It's a matter of universal nature and where it most applies. So that's a word to the wise. Then engage earnestly in meditative prayer. So you can see there that meditation is really a part of the bhakti path too. And I'd say contemplation even more so, is that you would sit and create a relationship with Shiva inside of you, or with Divine Mother, or with Krishna in this case. That is the bhakti path being outlined through the Gita. According to Sri Ramakrishna, he was asked, what's the message of the Gita? And I thought his answer, I think, was probably the best of all. He said, it's what you get when you say Gita many times in a row. Gita, 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 Gita. So it turns into Tagi, which means renunciation. Tyagi is a Sanskrit word which means renunciation. So if you say Gita, 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 pretty soon, if you say it long enough, you're hearing Tagi, 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 Tagi. And that he says, that's the main message of the Bhagavad Gita, is to renounce the world of name and form and time and space based in Maya, and realize the eternal Brahman as your own self, Atman. So when we think Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is this teacher, this great teacher of Swami Vivekananda, who has in the Gospel of Ramakrishna that's been noted down so well, has all of these wonderful solutions for us in terms of the eternal Dharma. This Sanatana Dharma will last forever, he says in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. It's eternal. Well, the last one there, I spent a little time on how meditation is a part of the bhakti path. Increased devotion to Ishvara. So Ishvara is the highest form of God the human mind can conceive. That's a direct quote from Swami Vivekananda. The highest form of God the human mind can conceive of is called Ishvara. And of course, if your devotions are to the Divine Mother of the universe, which is a very wonderful ideal, then it would be Ishvari. And we see that fleshes out nicely with some bullet points the Bhakti Yoga path. Let's look across the board at the other wing of the bird as we look at Jnana Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, you'll get off the ground with it very well, as I said, if you're this bird of the Atman, the soul that wants to soar high in the skies of non-dual awareness. Krishna says in there about Jnana Yoga, he whose intellect is unattached everywhere, who is endowed with non-dual understanding, that one reaches consummate knowledge. In another area of the Gita, he says, they come to me, those who love me, I give them the yoga of discrimination so that they can come to me. So you get closer and closer to God when you destroy ignorance with Dhyanam. You refine your consciousness of your buddhi and take it from just an individual tattva and join it with the Atman, which is sort of how Shankara puts it in the Vivekachudamani. Vacha Nyacha Tam Atmani Nyacha Buddhi Sakshini Chayacha Buddhi Sakshini are some of the terms he uses. And he says that you should join the word with the mind with the intellect with the ego, and the ego with the Atman, and then join them all into Brahman, because Brahman is the soul of everything. So that's these great souls talking about the power of the intellect, the refined buddhi. You see there then the bullet points in Jnana. Whereas in Bhakti, you listen to the accounts of God's deeds and did your rituals and sang praises, bhajans and kirtan, and did japa the holy names. Jnana is a more interior thing. You recite the slokas of the scriptures. That's in Raja Yoga, that's called svadhyaya. So you memorize and recite the slokas. It's part of the father of yoga's Kriya Yoga, where he talks about the need to do svadhyaya. Recite these slokas because it'll bring forth memories of past lifetimes reciting these slokas. Also because it will hold you in good stead while you go through life, and always have the words of the great seers readily at hand in your mind. Memorize the slokas of the scriptures. Take teachings from an illumined teacher. We call that getting a direct transmission. You get a direct transmission from a great soul. That's rather rare in these day and times, but something that takes a very reverent attitude. Tad vidhi prani patena paripaschena sevaya upadek shanti te jnana jnaninas tattvadarshinaha, he says in the Gita. Shri Krishna says that you need to approach the teachers and bow down, make yourself humble, serve them, and then you ask those questions that the Jnana Yoga is proposing here. And get those teachings as a direct transmission from that soul who is living in yoga. That is better than just reading about yoga or something. Or never finding out that yoga has these four great arms. Non-dual wisdom, discriminating wisdom being one of them. Comprehend the meaning of the scriptures. That will, of course, be aided greatly by having a guru so that you can ask questions. That's in our tradition in Advaita Vedanta. It's called Atma Vichara. So you take the teachings from an illumined soul, and you don't want them just to stick in your craw, like the pigeon, feeding the pigeon peas and corns. It just sits there and it doesn't get into its stomach to get digested. Sri Ramakrishna had a story like that. So when you take the teachings from the guru, make sure you linger on them, contemplate them, find out what you don't understand about them, go to the teacher and ask directly. That's your great opportunity to get things clarified. And when things get clarified, then you can intensify your practice. You probably shouldn't intensify an impure mind. So you want to get your mind as pure as possible before you start doing those austerities. Tapas, you see. If you're Tapodana, if your name is Tapodana, then all of a sudden you're a rich treasure of austerities that you've done. That, like memorization of the slokas, are right there, ready to help you in life and to help your mind stay balanced in the midst of difficulties like the world is going through again and again. So I'm lingering there again on comprehend the meaning of the scriptures. It's very important to contemplate it and run it by your teacher. Ask questions about the Atman. And if you have to, even about Maya, they say there are 4 or 5 things that are really good subjects for Atma Vichara, and Brahman is the first one, non-dual reality. Ishvara, which we just mentioned, is the other one, that is God with form. And then you probably can ask about sadhana, that is your spiritual practice. Am I doing my practice right? Should I intensify it? What kind of purification should I do next, and so forth. So sadhana is there. And then you can also ask about Maya if you have to. That is, something's really plaguing me here and giving me problems. Can you help me, sir? So those things are fair game in any question answer session that you have with a teacher who's willing to dive in with you and help clear the mind up. So going on with that chart, then we have the next entries on the Jnana Yoga side are discriminate between the real and the unreal. The nitya is the real or the eternal. The anitya is the unreal or what is non-eternal. So nitya vastu viveka is a great you might as well call it one of the Mahavakyas of Advaita Vedanta, another or a sub Mahavakya, you might say, other than the four main ones, that is become so well known in the path. Nitya, Nitya, Vastu, Viveka. So you must know the difference between the real and the unreal, or you could say between the essence and the non-essence. Or even in Christianity, if you're interested in yoga, you could say Jesus said, make sure you separate the wheat from the chaff, because he was talking to his students too at the time, because they were besieged on all sides by the Romans and by fallen Judaism, and a lot of problems in that time when Jesus was born. So he said, then use the tool of separating the wheat from the chaff, just like you do on your farm, when you want to get the essence and put the non-essence aside. So discriminate between the real and the unreal is probably the first teaching you may hear if you enter into a Vedanta Sangha and start doing Advaita Vedanta sadhana. Then penetrate through cosmic appearances. If you have the tools to see through things, then what you're really doing is seeing them as they truly are. Now, in our Western science, for instance, we saw, to a certain extent, they saw that objects weren't what they appeared to be, that they were made of vibrating particles, atoms, neutrons, quarks, subatomic particles. Pretty soon come to find that they're changing at a rate of seconds, so you can't really know them. It goes really well with the teaching of Vedanta that objects cannot be known, because they're really just projections of thought from your mind. But of course, physical science didn't go that far. And Western psychology is still just an infinite. It doesn't even think in terms of rebirth yet. So what we're talking about with the Sanatana Dharma is knowing that all of this is appearance, and that objects cannot fulfill you because they're empty. They're empty of substance, and they're empty of the ability to make you happy. People making that mistake over and over again. Swami Vivekananda said, I think this world will make me happy. I think these objects will make me happy. And then they go to death. They were never fulfilled. And they come back, and that makes up the samsaric wheel of birth and death. On and on they go, spinning on in a circle through an endless time, through endless cycles. Like Lord Buddha telling us that it's all a cycle. Life, and it's like a river going round and round. So get out and sit on the banks, he said, and watch the river go by, and you'll see then pretty soon the same thing go by again and again. And you'll probably at that time get some world weariness and want to detach. Chuggy, 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 as we were just saying. Then you'll realize how important renunciation is to the whole package. For those of us who have a problem with the word renunciation in the world, when we start to put on the teachings of the Dharma from India and Tibet and Zen and Japan and so forth, we have to remember that Sri Ramakrishna had, again, another great solution for that word, for the problems associated with the word renunciation. When he said that the monks have to renounce internally and externally. So if you're a true sannyasin, then you'll be giving it all up, and you'll just be heading for enlightenment. That's the one thing. My teacher used to say, a monk is a person who takes a canoe, goes to a far distant island, and when he gets to the island, he burns the canoe. So it means he's not going to take another body again. He's going to reach the shores of formless awareness, and like a hailstone, Shankar says, just merge there into the ocean of consciousness. So the monks then, to get back to the saying of Sri Ramakrishna, the monks, they must renounce inwardly and externally. But the householder must renounce only, what would be your guess? Inwardly. It's most important that the householder also know the difference between the real and the unreal. You might say it's more important for the householder in a sense, because they're moving amongst objects. And here comes another path for us, the path of yoga. And we're talking about that right now. There's sannyas and there's the dharmic householder. But the path of yoga is rather a unique path, and Krishna mentions it to Arjuna, be thou a yogi, Arjuna, after giving him so many reasons why the yogic lifestyle is so powerful and so transformational. So that's something to keep in mind then when we think about the word renunciation. It's very important to know that everyone must renounce, because this is all a mental projection out here. It's an illusion in a sense. It's Maya. It's ephemeral. It's transitory. It's a reflection of something deeper. It's an expression if you're a tantricist. But however way you cut it or look at it, it's not real in and of itself. It all comes from the mind. So now we have to merge the mind back into this discriminating intellect, which we're talking about right now, the Jnana Yoga. Let's look at the final points of the Jnana Yoga and see that it consists of penetrate through cosmic appearance, which I was just talking about, look through the object and see the non-dual Brahman behind everything, or at least see intelligence behind everything. If you can't go so far as stretch as to see Brahman in everything, which is a very rare thing to do, to be able to do, then at least see it all as your own knowledge. It's a projection of thoughts. And Holy Mother, my Guru's guru, used to say that objects are just thought made manifest. So when you're looking at an object or a room or a pillar or a tree or whatever it is you're looking at, you're just looking at your own thought. And it's all inside your mind. So all the worlds are in the mind. It's a common teaching in India, but I think it's another thing that's been very much forgotten today, or at least they're forgetting to take it seriously. And then finally there, abide continually in non-dual realization. So Jnana Yoga takes you right up there, not only just to the doorway of Advaita Vedanta, but in and through to non-dual realization. So I hope you're enjoying this tour through the 4 yogas. It's something of a rather unique design nowadays, and that's why it was my great joy to put it together on this chart. Let's see what the quote says under those 2 yogas. That is, I put some quotes about the 4 yogas from Swami Vivekananda. This time he says, I want to give truth dry, hard reason, softened in the sweetest syrup of love, and made spicy with intense work, and cooked in the kitchen of yoga so that even a baby can easily digest it. Of course, one of our favorite of his quotes about the 4 yogas, you see there, sweetest syrup of love would be what now? That would be bhakti. And then made spicy with intense work, that would be karma. And cooked in the kitchen of yoga, well, that would be yoga itself. That is the 8-limb yoga. And dry, hard reason at the beginning. So that's the Jnana Yoga. So he has all 4 yogas mentioned here. Bhakti, Dhyanam, karma, and then you might say meditation is that even a baby can digest it. We should be able to get right into the state of meditation on the Lord. The minute we sit down on our asana, many people are writing me these days saying, it's very difficult for me. I have a habit of asana. When I want to sit, I begin twisting into different shapes and I never get to meditation and so forth. Or possibly I sit down, my mind's restless. I don't have a asana problem. So I sit down and I start having, my mind runs. And so I want to know of a way to gather it back as Arjuna complains. Oh, I think, in the Gita he says, I think the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. Oh Lord, tell me how to do it. And he says, by abhyasa yoga, by constant practice. So we need to constantly be at this, our daily meditations, our daily study of the scriptures, our daily devotions to the altar, and then our work outside will become divinized. And those are the 4 yogas working perfectly in accord with one another. And that's yoga. To me, that's true yoga. The last few months, I've seen so many, as I watched different things going on, so many different versions of what yoga is. And I very rarely heard anyone express yoga from the Advaita platform. So this is what we call Advaita Vedanta yoga, or yoga perfectly fused with Advaita Vedanta. There's probably never been a better hybrid than non-duality in yoga, that is Vedanta in yoga. That makes a perfect dovetail. Also, we know Buddhism and Tantra made a perfect hybrid when it got into Tibet. So these things are really powerful paths. Sometimes hybrids work, and in this case, we're talking about the hybrid of hybrids. That is not just taking two things and making them work, making four things and making them operate in such a way that you'll not fail to get enlightened in this very lifetime. So I think we've had some deep teachings on Bhakti and Dhyanam. Let's go ahead and then fuse the other two yogas into this in the time remaining for us. There you see on your screen, I'm hoping all of you are seeing this nicely, because we have one more quote to say and we'll save it. But let's look at Raja Yoga. Now, remember when we say Raja Yoga and we say Krishna in the Gita and we say Swami Vivekananda in contemporary times, there are many different words for Raja Yoga. There's Patanjala, because Patanjali, the father of yoga, put together the 8-limbed yoga. So there's another name for it, Ashtanga Yoga. In the Gita, you'll find Sri Krishna calling it Buddha Yoga. And even in this day and time, Holy Mother called it Gyanodaya Yoga and Manoraja Yoga. So she was already putting together the 4 yogas into 2 separate hybrids. I have a chart on that, but we probably won't have time to see it. Stay tuned to us at SRV and you'll come upon it soon when it's shown. But under Raja Yoga, you could see this quote from Sri Krishna: dwell in solitude, restrain the senses, control the mind, and engage in meditation. You will thus reach perfection in Brahman. You'll become fitted for the Brahman state, as Sri Krishna says in the Gita. So you can see how the yoga, the 8-limbed yoga, if you call it that, or the kingly yoga, Raja Yoga, is set up so that you isolate yourself. Kaivalya, the father of Samkhya Yoga, Lord Kapila, whom is mentioned too in the Gita, of sages, I am Lord Kapila, Krishna said in the Gita, which, by the way, is timeline is very important. So Krishna lived so many millennia before Christ probably, and before that he was already saying he was of sages, he was Kapila. So you can see how ancient Kapila probably is then as far as the timeline goes. So you can see this solitude from nature, restrain the senses, because the senses have their contact with the elements, which is all a part of nature. Control the mind, the senses came out of the mind, then engage in meditation. So he wants you to set up your meditation by these prerequisites. So it's not like joining the 4 yogas is going to be a real easy thing. You see, we're working on all 4 sides of ourselves constantly. That's what we want, openness. We take 1 step towards God, God will take 100 steps towards us, kind of fashion. So that's what we want, and we just have to have the willingness to go forward, as Sri Ramakrishna said. Go forward is one of his great 2-word mantras. So you can see how Raja Yoga is set up. I mean, I think in a sense, Jnana Yoga is the quickest path. If you can take it all in. 1 lifetime, you should be able to free yourself with the Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the slow boat to well, we say the slow boat to China, but in this case, slow boat to India, because you're not in any special hurry there. You belong to the Lord, and you're just going wherever the Lord takes you. It's very beautiful. And then, of course, Karma Yoga has risks because of work becoming a habit and continually falling into rebirth with your ancestors who are also very busy working all the time. But Vivekananda said about that path, though he thought it was very important because he wanted to help people who were suffering with it. But he also said, basically, at first, duty is a good thing. Karma yoga, action and duty is a good thing. But pretty soon it becomes a morbid dream. And then after that, you can't get out of it anymore. And it sweeps you into the Kala chakra, wheel of birth and death. So this is another reason why we want to say, look across the board and say, dwell in solitude. And these bullet points, calm and control the mind's thoughts. Remember, we just said the ego is cruising around on the mind, its thoughts, and its intellect. And it's going from place to place. Remember, we just said that? So what about this? If you could calm and control the mind's thoughts, then it wouldn't be pulled here and there anymore. And then you could meditate on the non-dual Brahman, who is pure, who is formless, who is actionless, and who is divine, says the Upanishad. Perfect, formless, actionless, and divine. So if Brahman is actionless, then you're going to want to simulate that. So you're going to want to be actionless yourself in order to get into that highest state of awareness. So then purge the mind of desire and passions, still the mind's tendency of distractions, uncover and neutralize all karmas, dissolve the mind's limiting impressions, reach the samadhi of wisdom. That's called savichara, savitarka, nirvichara, nirvitarka. Those samadhis are actually samadhis that you're having with objects when you begin to look at the world in a different way. The objects then give you bliss rather than just pleasure and pain. So reach the samadhi of wisdom. It's not the highest samadhi, but again, this is where it really sounds a lot like the Jnana Yoga that we were just looking at. And then gain Kaivalya. Interesting, I just mentioned that word even when I saw the word solitude in Sri Krishna's quote there. Gain Kaivalya, which is isolation from nature, because nature produces all forms. Of course, the mind takes nature and produces all forms. So Kaivalya is a penultimate kind of station in yoga that's just prerequisite to asam pragyata, they call it, or seedless samadhi. And then immerse yourself in nirvikalpa samadhi, which would be called asam pragyata, seedless samadhi. So I went through those rather quickly, but I was about to say, and I got interrupted a little early by myself, Raja is a very, very dense path, and the sutras of yoga and so forth, have been so many commentaries on it. And it takes a teacher and some long-lasting deep study to plumb the depths of the yoga of meditation and to get samadhi. And of course, you can sit in meditation 5, 10, 20, 30 years, maybe meditate all your life, and still not get enlightenment. So there must be some missing facets that are going to help you attain to freedom from ignorance. If you want to call that enlightenment, just getting free of ignorance and getting free of birth and death. This is what Krishna just said when we read out of the Gita a little while ago. Even Bhakti Yoga will take you beyond death if you follow those who love the Lord. So finally there, immersed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi sort of says it all. So here are 3 yogas we've looked at, and let's finish this chart off by looking at this yoga that all of us are involved in almost all the time. Hopefully not to the exclusion of the other 3 though. So karma is the yoga of selfless action. The word selfless there is very important. I was just talking to a student just yesterday about that and how selfishness is very much a part of the human life and human ego. And they say that it's a barometer for measuring how close you are to God. The more selfish you are, the further away from God you are. The more selfless you are, the closer to God you are. So if that's the case and you want to get close to God, then look into this problem of selfishness and become more selfless every day. And karma yoga done properly will help snap some of the bonds that are tying you to work. Let's look at it. Engage only in obligatory actions. So right away you're clearing the field of actions that you don't really need to be doing. How about some actions that are not all that good for you? It's interesting that COVID, as we're talking about it in contemporary times, has actually stopped a lot of some of the actions that we're doing that aren't good for the society. Lots of jet air pollution and people being able to see the mountains again and so forth and so on. Takes a great calamity in the world sometimes, at least in part, to make people sit up and give up some of these actions which were not obligatory. So Sri Krishna says in the Gita, check into the scriptures and with your teachers to find out what you need to do and what you need to give up. Because there's that word renunciation again, what you need to give up for your own peace of mind. Because you need peace of mind first and foremost. You can't get anything done properly without peace of mind. So people are engaging in works with restless mind. They're accruing karma. It might not show up right away, but it's storing up. And people who are engaging in work with laziness and slothfulness, of course, that shows up right away in the work itself. And that is the result of the work. And so very important that we balance our minds, like say with some of these other yogas. Now, 2 of these yogas have already told us we need to have peace of mind and balanced mind and no restlessness and so forth. So that's very important then to remember that, so that karma yoga, we can follow it in the most direct and proper way. So onward on the chart then with karma yoga, we see, to finish it up, that there are some other bullet points. Use your viveka, that is, what's real, what's unreal, that we just looked up above, to find out how to engage in only proper actions, dharmic actions. Second, renounce action done for selfish motive. Do everything for others. Don't take it to oneself. Take only what you do and be satisfied with that, as Shankara says in his Viveka Chudamani and his Bhaja Govindam. Perform all action with evenness of mind. That's a beautiful one. If you can just have sattva when you're doing your actions, just no matter what work is, don't to the work you have the right, but not to the fruits thereof. Probably sounds familiar to you. Shri Krishna told Arjuna that in the Gita. So when you engage in work, make sure before you take a step towards it, before you even go out the door in the morning, Vivekananda says, that your mind is even and clear thinking, so that anything you engage in will then have the proper results, and good karma will come forth, or maybe even no karma. That is, there's black karma, we know what that is. There's black and white karma, that's very confusing. There's white karma, which is a gold chain, and then there's colorless karma, as the teaching says in the tradition. So colorless karma is a very secret. It's a great secret how to do that. But you will learn how to do it as you keep your mind balanced in the midst of work. Evenness of mind, then, that could be a rule of thumb for all of you. If you take anything out of this 2-hour talk I'm giving today, and we'll follow it up tomorrow, of course, with another 2-hour talk, take that. Let's just engage in all action for the next 24 hours with perfect evenness of mind. And if any of you are watching, if there are people out there watching who have questions, then you can tell me how that worked for you. Also, do not seek the fruits of action. So we jumped ahead on ourselves just here. We said to the fruits to the work you have the right, not to the fruits. So Krishna says, let the fruits fall into the hands of the Lord, and the Lord and the Mother will do what they will with them. But you just do the work, and it's with evenness of mind, and you'll get exactly your due. Charan Krishna had a nice story about that, actually. There were two children, and they had a grandmother, I think, or a grandmother, or mother-in-law, and she doled out rice in a bowl to each of them, these two little girls. So she'd give them just a bowl full of rice for the meal, no more, no less. So one day, the old woman was reaching for the bowl, and she dropped it, and it broke. And both the girls had the same thought in their mind at the same moment. Now we're going to get more. So since she doesn't have the measuring bowl anymore, she'll have to measure with her hands, and we're probably going to get more. So that's how the human mind, according to Sri Ramakrishna, in that case, is very selfish and very worldly and very calculating. So to be able to accept just what's your due, and no more and no less, is a balanced mind, the function of the balanced mind. And so a lot of these bullet points of karma yoga here are telling us how to act. It's the karma of action. We'll look at it again tomorrow, as I said. I have the two wings of the bird chart I'll show you. How action and inaction are, how it should be put together. It's a very beautiful teaching. The yoga of karma and the yoga of meditation. To finish up this chart, we see there, detached from the outcomes of action we just had, now we perform all work as worship. And I said that was a phrase, I think, coined by Swami Vivekananda in the late 1800s when he was here. Perform all work as worship. That's kind of a unique thought. You're worshiping how again? You're worshiping man? No, you're worshiping God in mankind. Make sure to make that distinction, so that the ego doesn't take more than its due. And you're actually worshiping the Atman in everyone, because when you point out the Atman in them, then the Atman will come forward. It's a very good way of mediating with people's egos, is to be humble and, like Jesus said, turn the other cheek kind of action that you do. And it brings out deeper things in them that are covered over by anger and other passions and by ignorance. So these are also very practical ways of how to reach people, not just to perfect yourself, but to help others along the way. Also, utilize all work to serve God and mankind, and work meticulously, but with detachment. That's a caution, because people think, well, then if I don't get the fruits, but I'm supposed to work, then it's not going to please me anymore. See, so the ego's talking again. So you should rather tell the ego that that's not what we mean. We mean that when you do work, if you do it in a slovenly way or a lazy way, it's going to cause you karma. But if you do work with a balanced mind, then that work will not cause you karma. And so that's what you have to placate the ego by telling it do work as worship, and make sure that you have that special perspective or mindset in mind when you do, so that you get only your due and no more. And then you're following up the great teachings of karma yoga. So now we'll finish that chart here, and we will take the quote at the very bottom, because I've put together Sri Krishna's teachings here and from the Gita, along with Swami Vivekananda's quotes about the four yogas, so that we'd have a good introduction to this topic of Chaturdasha Yoga, or the four great universal yogas, or the new religion of this age. If we can bring it back in this way, make it a part of our daily practice, and put it in highest preference above all other things we think yoga might be, then you'll see the society, a new society, Sri Ramakrishna said. So here's Vivekananda's another wonderful quote from him. Remember, Swami Vivekananda was one who lectured a lot in the West when he came here. So he didn't write books. There are books on him. There are books taken from his talks and lectures. So when you read a book by Vivekananda, it's really a living book, we call it. It's not someone sat down and said, well, I think I'll pen something out here, what I'm thinking, no matter how astute that might be. But it's actually, you're hearing it straight from his lectures. So there are people around taking down his talks in shorthand, and then putting them into books like the Four Yogas. I mean, that's another thing I probably should mention here, is that if you really have a keen interest in this new religion of this age, then go find those books by Vivekananda, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, and read them all. I often have my students start into the path that way, so that they've all been put in separate editions by the Ramakrishna order, and people swear by them. Start off with something like Bhakti Yoga or Karma Yoga. If you want something that rings your bells up there in the attic or in the belfry, try Jnana Yoga. He says some amazing things. He said amazing things in his lectures. So put that in here with this teaching, that you have plenty of reference here to go back to if you want to see further and deeper into this great new religion of this age. So the last thing that we'll do, and you could say now that you have gone through a complete chart with Babaji Bob Kindler, would be to recite this quote of his. Would to God that all men were so constituted that in their minds all of these elements, philosophy, mysticism, emotion, and work, were equally present in full. That is the ideal, my ideal of a perfect man. Everyone who has only one or two of these elements, I consider one-sided. And this world is almost full of such one-sided men, with knowledge of that one road only in which they move. So we're not even, I should say it this way, we're talking about spiritual life here. There are people in spiritual life who have more or less mastered one particular of these four yogas, and he calls them somewhat narrow, and he's seen too much of that. He wants to see an integration of all four of these get together to make the perfect man and create the perfect society that his master talked about to him. So you see there again how flexible he is or was with the English language. All these elements, he says, philosophy, mysticism, emotion, and work. So philosophy would be Dhyanam, mysticism would be meditation, emotion would be bhakti, and work would be karma. So he could easily put out these different English words to suggest the four yogas and keep them on people's minds. So there we've had bullet point rundowns of the four yogas, 4 different quotes from Sri Krishna, and also some description of this new religion of the sage that Vivekananda wants to bring back to us. We should all be four-sided then, have all 4 sides to us, like Lord Brahma is four-faced, for instance, and gives out the 4 Vedas with each of his 4 mouths. Maybe we should look at that as a kind of example or metaphor of how we should be like Lord Brahma when we take on these 4 yogas and practice them day to day. So here, let's move to what I promised you earlier. There's a chart on the many different kinds of yogas there. There are. The ocean of consciousness, all the different waves of yoga in the ocean of consciousness. You'll probably like to see this. It's a little bit less intense than the chart that you just went through with me. And so there you see another chart I put together, and of course with my own Param Guru there, Srisharda Devi, revealed there, and called it the Ocean of Awareness and its Yogic Waves, or subtitled Universal Pathways to Enlightenment. Now, I think a very beautiful saying of Swami Vivekananda And a phrase he coined was fire of yoga. I have another chart that shows the different significances of fire and the different levels of fire. There's fire of a fireplace, and there's a fire of suffering, and there's fire of purification, and there's a fire of knowledge that burns away ignorance. But then there's this fire of yoga that Vivekananda talked about, and that was his special, a special quality, that he had this fire of yoga, and he could use it to burn away anything. So he says here, or said at one time, sitting up on the snow peaks of the Himalayas, I repeat from the Upanishads, quote, he has neither disease nor death nor decay, for verily he has obtained a body full of the fire of yoga. And of course, that's why we would see in Vivekananda all the qualities of a perfect man already matured when he appeared in the body. These are called past masters. There are people who are working on mastery, adepts, we might call them. There are people who are masters, have become masterful, but then there are these great souls called past masters, and like Krishna, they would come back from age to age to help people out of darkness, Maya's veils. That's a quote from Swami Vivekananda. So Holy Mother is there, and in this chart, I just thought I would put a bunch of waves that had different names of yogas on them so we could see how powerful yoga is and how much more it is than just physical yoga, or just something to use for healing diseases in the body, or something, that maybe we have to run through as a sort of intermediate refuge, when we should be actually understanding that yoga is union with God. There is yoga that is practice, no doubt, but also that's very high. But there's also yoga that's presence. So the yoga as presence is Brahman's own. And that's what we try and get into, to feel the presence of God, to be in the presence of God. That can happen rarely with form, when you find a great soul on earth, which is very rare. But it can happen all the time if the human being can enter into non-dual state in meditation or deep contemplation of the scriptures via these yogic pathways. So with the four main yogas stated, well, you see the quote there in the upper left that actually is where this class came from. This is the new religion of this age. The synthesis of yoga, knowledge, devotion, and work. The propagation of knowledge and devotion down to the very lowest, without distinction of age or sex. So that's from Swami Vivekananda's letters. And I mentioned his talks he gave. He also wrote lots of letters to people in both India and England and America, as his followers and students and friends around the world. And so if you got a letter, you'd hear something like that in it. Or if you heard him speak, one of his, because he had very perfect English, not only written English, but spoken English, then you'd hear him say something like that. He says, so the new religion of the age, that's where I got that quote. And he puts together these four yogas. Yoga would be meditation, knowledge, Dhyanam, devotion, bhakti, and work, karma. So just as long as we're putting this together with the Chaturjasya Yoga of Sri Krishna and the Gita, let's look at Sri Krishna's 18 chapters and the names of them really quickly. There you see from the top to the bottom. Of course, you know the first chapter is Vishada Yoga, and I didn't put that in here necessarily because that's a yoga of depression. It's a very contradictory kind of thing, but we find Arjuna in a very difficult position in his life when the Gita opens. So all lodged there in the Mahabharata, of course, in a much larger work. But as the yoga chapters flow on, there you see some of the other yogas that are either names of chapters or are mentioned in the Gita by Sri Krishna. Ananya Yoga, and that really means the yoga of non-separation. So it's a very Advaitic mention of yoga, and that's why I put it first, because I just was mentioning that a few minutes ago, how yoga as presence is Brahman, and yoga as practice is the sadhaka's business, to keep mind pure. So if you keep the mind pure, it can always stay in the presence of Brahman. And the four yogas will help the soul do that if it falls out. So Ananya Yoga is mentioned in the Gita by Sri Krishna, very powerful, only one mention, but there's your non-dual strand there in the Gita. Abhyasa Yoga, I mentioned that some time ago earlier in the class, the yoga of constant practice. Those two yogas put together, we're almost starting another new religion of this age, aren't we? They're just so powerful. Then Sankhya Yoga is the name of the second chapter in the Gita. That's the yoga of varieties. But Tantra also has a teaching on varieties that by Chitra it's called, that people get caught off guard by varieties. They get into them. They begin to study them. They take them as their profession. They become their occupation. And then they spend all their time in that one little road along which they move, paraphrasing Swami Vivekananda again. So an occupation or a work or a variety of things, foods, arts, thoughts, whatever the thing might be, is called an evolutive maya in Tantra. So there's riskiness there, you see. You have to keep the mind centered, very centered in one thing. So that's why Ananya Bhakti and constant practice of it, Abhyasa Yoga, are very powerful. And then Sankhya Yoga, you can start to see things as expressions of Brahman. Tantra would be very kind to that. It's called Leela, or sportive play of consciousness. And so that's how to turn a risky business into something very valuable, very revealing. There's an opposite side to everything, is what we might say here. Sannyas Yoga, how to renounce basically the projections of the mind. Sankalpa, Vikalpa are the two words in the Gita. It's very good to know. Like I said earlier about the householder has to renounce internally, the monk renounce outwardly and internally. So if you're a dharmic householder, I hope you are, then your internal renunciation would be based on knowing the world to be unreal. So that's giving up sankalpas and vikalpas. You can't actually do that and still live and act. So when you say giving up sankalpa, vikalpa, you mean these thought forms that are constantly rising in the mind. You have to dissolve them at the end of every day. Beautiful teachings in the non-dual scriptures, like Om Pramadane Na Sandeha Kim Karishyami Vrittiman Udpachante Viliyante Buddhascha Yata Jale. And Jale is water, and Buddhas are these bubbles, you see, bubbles of intelligence that are rising. So everyone is giving rise to these thoughts and to these tanmatras and to these various things constantly. They're exuding those things off of their very body-mind mechanism. Off the body is vibrations and various things coming off water, like vapor, coming off fire like heat, coming up in air like the wind. But they're also giving off these mental waves, and they're called sankalpas and vikalpas. So what's the difference between a person who is considering them to be real and a person who is dissolving them at the end of every day? That's the question we should ask. People are getting attached to these sankalpas and vikalpas. So then Krishna would tell you, like he's telling Arjuna in the Gita, give up sankalpa and vikalpa because it's a positive evil. It's keeping you from balance of mind and from enlightenment. And it'll send you back to rebirth with your ancestors. You want to walk the path of the sun, not the path of the moon. path of the sun, they go never to return again to embodiment and its sufferings. So I'm getting into a longer commentary here about sannyas yoga because I know that that really has to do more about these projections. So when I was quoting from the Bhagavad Gita just now, it was like you dissolve all your projections at the end of the day. Everyone has mental projections based basically in desire. So what's the difference between those who run afoul and have suffering from their mental projections, or a combination of pleasure and pain, and a person who just stays balanced all the time? The person who stays balanced all the time is dissolving the sankalpas and vikalpas at the end of every day. You just come home from work, if you're a Dharma household, and you say, that's all gone. It's empty. I dissolve it. I give it up. I gave up the sankalpa. And now I start afresh. So every day is a fresh start. Nitya sarga, they call that. You wake up ready and willing to participate in life and all its activities, knowing the whole thing is just some sort of passing dream, and that you can extract essence out of it without having to get pulled into it and suffer and lose your peace of mind. So this is what gets thought about when you think about any of these great yogas. Vibhuti yoga is next. That's a yoga of various divinities. Vibhutis are enlightened souls that you can. Jnana Vijnana yoga is there. That's how you turn wisdom into realization. Purushottama, that's the great soul, the greatest of all souls. You go to him for refuge, or her. Akshara Brahman, that's imperishable. You're talking about something that's imperishable. You're looking all around you, you're seeing everything coming into birth, going to death. And when you say, well, yes, but there's an imperishable foundation behind it all that's never born and never dies when everything else is born and everything else dies. The regime of Prakriti, Sri Krishna says. So Purushottama Yoga and Akshara Brahma Yoga are very powerful along that line of God with form and God beyond form. The imperishable state of Brahman, Akshara. Rajya Vidya Rajya Guhya Yoga is, of course, the supreme science and supreme secret. Jnana Karma Sannyasa, how to give up all actions in the proper spirit using wisdom yoga to get into non-dual state. Vishvarupa Darshana Yoga, how to get a vision of the divine form through meditation. And the rest. I mean, I could comment on each one of these, just the significance of the Sanskrit alone. But you can see them in the context of how they happen in the Gita, because these are some of the names of the chapters of the Gita. Like the field and its knower there. And how to reach the final moksha. So along with that, in the few minutes remaining, let's look, because we have seen 2/3 of this chart already. Let's look at the bottom third, and then I'll take some questions. So just sitting and thinking about the various yogas that I've heard about myself, I've studied the scriptures since I was 20 years old, the philosophies of India, and followed deeply into 5 or 6 different darshanas that I was very interested in, based in the Vedanta. I thought of some of these great yogas that I'd heard of. There's all waves on the ocean of consciousness there, as it were. There you see Advaita Yoga, and across from it, Antar Yoga, Inner Yoga, and in the middle, Charya Yoga. That's qualification yoga, how to qualify yourself. Oh, and there you see in the left, second one, Buddhi Yoga. So you see that's one of the 4 great yogas, almost Jnana Yoga renamed, you could say. The far right there, second, is Laya Yoga. That's a good yoga because it's learning how to dissolve everything. And I was just talking about that. My thoughts persist all day. I can't sleep at night because they keep haunting me. I go to work with them. Sometimes certain thoughts that are negative or even thoughts that are positive haunt me for weeks in gunic cycles. But if I knew Laya Yoga, I could dissolve them all right now on the spot. It's almost like saying, it doesn't matter. And all that brooding and suffering that people are going through because of something that's not really real doesn't make sense to me, see? So you want to be able to dissolve them. Again, just like bubbles into water. It's a very great practice. It's very Advaitic in its atmosphere and not that hard to practice. And you get pretty quick results from it. I think in English, the way I put that is just brooding is the worst waste of time possible. So don't brood on anything. People are brooding on things that aren't even ever going to happen, yet they're still afraid of them. Or they're brooding on things that already happened in their past. Nobody's thinking about them anymore except that person who's suffering. So it's called living in the past and living in the present. And you want to live in the eternal moment. So there are yogas equipped to put you in that eternal moment. So quickly look at the rest of them. I won't comment on them so that we can get to questions and end on time here today. Mantra yoga, I mentioned that was could almost be a yoga in its own, of a fifth yoga. Prema Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of supreme love of the Lord. Go to Sri Krishna to understand that one. Kriya Yoga, that's the original Patanjali's Kriya Yoga that has love of the Lord, austerity, and study of the scriptures as its components. Vasana Yoga, that's how to get rid of your desires. Dhyana Yoga at the bottom left, that is another name for the meditation yoga or Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. Brahma Yoga in the middle, Siddhi Yoga, Yoga of Perfection, and Lakshya Yoga. So these are some waves that are forming on the ocean of consciousness. And you can see there that they're all to be used as if they were one with that yoga of consciousness. So here, so we can have 15 minutes, I'll read you this final quote. Oh, well, actually, maybe I won't. It just disappeared. But that's a beautiful quote at the bottom of the chart to finish it up. And there it is. According to Patanjali, there are erratic thought waves called vrittis in the human mind, which must be pacified. Further, there are mighty waves of yoga in the ocean of pure conscious awareness, and they must be unified for this task and utilized. So there we have gone through two charts in a classic Babaji Bob Kindler discourse, and this one being on the four yogas. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow at the same time for two more charts we'll go through to show you how the four yogas are the religion of this age. So maybe now I can pass it back to our moderator and see if there are any questions that I'd be glad to attend to.
Thank you, Babaji, for a very enlightening session. Viewers, if you have any question, now is the time to leave it, either in the chat box or preferably in question and answer box. Babaji, I have one question. In the chart that you showed, I did not find a mention of Hatha Yoga. So, where do you place Hatha Yoga in the whole scheme?
Well, I was telling somebody yesterday, my next book is going to be called Atmic Testimony on Yoga. So it's how Vedavyas, the father of Vedanta, and how Swami Vivekananda did their commentaries on Patanjali's system of the eight-limbed yoga. So I've been going through again, the second or third time in my life, the eight-limbed yoga, and I found that in his eight-limbed yoga, there was really only one sutra that mentions Hatha Yoga. Of all those sutras, there's only one that mentions it. So, and it mentions it in terms of how to get into one position so that the mind can meditate. So I would say that viewing that none of the teachers that I ever learned from, nor any of the saints or seers that I ever read of the scriptures of India ever mentioned Hatha Yoga, nor did they do it when they came into the body that we know of, that I don't place Hatha Yoga very importantly. I think there's a really overemphasis on it. And of course, I'm talking as a Western man from a Western country where the higher yogas really aren't being practiced. I think in India, Hatha Yoga has a much higher place in people's minds and they're not so attached to it. It's just sort of, you can take it or leave it in India. And there are some people who have studied it and they know that it's something to be moved. You move along. There's a life after Hatha Yoga. See, but here it's like the rage. So it's a little difficult to talk about it without having to criticize it like that.
Babaji, when speaking about Karma Yoga, you mentioned how it is important to give up the fruits of our action, and that is the crux of practicing Karma Yoga. I have also read that it is not just giving up the fruits of action, but one must also give up the sense of doership, sense of the feeling that I am doing something. Can you shed some light on this aspect of Karma Yoga?
Yes, that's, again, that sense of I has been talked about very wonderfully, like by great beings like, say, Ramana Maharshi. He had a wonderful teachings and take on how to reduce the sense of I, and so did Lord Vashishta. Vashishta talks about in his Yoga Vashishta scripture, so ancient, back when he was teaching it to Sri Ram, when he was just a teenager. He was talking about the three kinds of ego and how the first one is Deha Jasahamkara, the ego of the body. And then there's Sakshahamkara, ego of the witness. And then there's Paramahamkara, which is pretty much no ego at all, or supreme being. So when you look at the ahamkara in India, again, sort of like Hatha Yoga, people already understand it as being not just an ego that's arrogant or calling someone egotistic, but here in the West, they don't understand the different forms of the ego. And Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about apakvahamkara and pakvahamkara, how if you had an unripe ego and it was giving you problems, then you'd offer it to the Lord and do your Bhakti Yoga, and that would sweeten and mature your ego to a ripe ego, and a ripe ego then wouldn't give you problems anymore in life or in spiritual practice. So again, I think that's kind of a synthesis where you would be using Bhakti Yoga to deflate, as it were, the human ego.
We have
I'm
one
seeing
question.
questions come in here. I'm seeing some questions in the chat box. Am I supposed to be looking at those?
No, I'll just read out those to you so that you can answer. One of the questions we have received is, do we individuals have by birth some form of yoga prominent in us, or that can be an illusion?
Oh, definitely not an illusion. Just like I mentioned, that Arjuna had the Vishada yoga going when we first read the Gita, first chapter. Vishada means depression, basically. So he's in a yoga, and he wasn't usually known to be depressed. He was a great warrior, and he was a balanced mind and a very good soul. So all of a sudden, he's got this horrible task in front of him, and then all of a sudden, he's got this depression that comes over him. So he's actually in union with depression. So I'd say that even people who aren't religionists or who aren't spiritually oriented or who aren't evidently born with any samskaras for yoga in their past lifetime, they also have yogas they're working under. Some people are depressed and they'll get out of depression. I have parents of students who've told me they've seen their sons and daughters here in the West get out of addictions and problems because they were going through a kind of suffering that suffering itself was a kind of yoga. Well, I don't mean that to concentrate on that, because again, when you're talking about India, who is one of the only countries, if not the only country, that really understands the import of rebirth and how everything comes from past impressions and other lifetimes, then you're talking about a people who have been raised with the knowledge of samskara for millennia. And over here, you know, we don't have any of that. When I was raised, my parents, there was no Dharma. So I had to find it in my 20s, and I had to go to a different country for it. So a lot of Western people, if they discover impressions in them, and that leads them to a path, then you've got to know that they were born with yogic potential.
The next question is, when our own self is our guru, is it important to look for another guru? If having a guru is must, how to identify a guru?
Very important to have a guru, even if you already think your mind is its own guru. You have to have another soul verify for you that you're enlightened. For instance, the Buddhists have the 10 Pure Lands teaching, where you become a bodhisattva. That means sort of like Jivan Mukta to Vedanta. You become free in that particular lifetime. And then you have to graduate 9 different lands of levels of consciousness. They're called Pure Lands. They each have a different name, and they each are attended with different kinds of practices that you master. So you have Buddhas along the way who are telling you whether or not you're qualified to go to the next higher land, or next higher samadhi, you could say it would be for us. So it's very important to have guru with you at all times. Guru is a principle, not a personality. I'm quoting Vivekananda. So if you have guru principle with you, even if your mind has become its own guru, you're going to have to check that with a master. And a master that's has been verified as an illumined soul, like the great souls that we're talking about today, Patanjali and Vedavyas and Vivekananda and Shri Krishna. I mean, those are the great masters. You always have to check your watch with them.
Next question is, what are the dynamics of dissolving the limiting impressions of the mind as against calming and controlling the thoughts in the mind?
Well, again, I think we probably, when we think of dynamics, we think maybe of action, like I have to get up and do something, like hatha yoga or jogging or whatever I have to do for my problem. We always relate it to action. But a mind that's more facile and more advanced can solve all of its problems inside of itself. So, for instance, you wouldn't see an illumined soul or a yogi or a rishi or an enlightened person going for psychotherapy or something, or having to go out and do some sort of physical exercise in order to feel better. They do it all from inside their mind. And it's one of the great secrets of illumination or enlightenment that the mind dictates everything for the illumined soul. A pure mind, chit shuddhi, is what you want to have. So and in terms of dynamics to get to that, they're all internal. We're so externally oriented that we think we have to go outside to do something, including our outer practice, when what the questioner just said was that there's these inner thoughts and the will. You see, if you practice the 4 yogas to to perfect your thoughts and to strengthen your will, then you wouldn't need any outer dynamics at all at any time. It's why they sit in one place, like Sri Ramakrishna, happy like a child, and Ramana Maharshi, just without owning anything. They're just purely not only just content and peaceful, but they're absolute masters of their mind, and they get everything from their mind. My own guru, Sri Sharda Devi, said that whenever she wanted anything, she just thought about it in her mind, and it came to her the next day.
Thank you, Babaji. Again, it was a wonderful session. A lot of things to learn for everybody. And viewers, do not forget to attend tomorrow morning, same time, 7 a.m. India IST, so where Babaji will continue this online Upanyas online lecture on Chaturdasya Mahayogas. Thank you again, Babaji. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. With this, we have come to conclusion of today's session. See you everyone tomorrow morning.